I'm very excited to invite a special guest for today's episode. She's Veronica Schmitt, popularly known as V. Veronica is a part of DFIR Labs, that is South Africa based digital forensics and incident response practice. She's also an assistant professor at Norway University, Norway. Her research is particularly interacted more towards the security of the medical devices. Medical device forensics is very close to her heart. So, hello, Veronica. Welcome to my show. Thank you so much for coming today. How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's always been, I like Friday hackery. So any Friday that I get to spend some time on my research is a good Friday. And today's been particularly a good day for that.
Okay, that's great. I'm hoping that we have a great learning experience today. So let's get started with the questions. So the first question I would like to ask, like as we all know that today we are living where everything is connected to internet. Maybe call it as an home appliance, the manufacturing or the patient health monitoring. But after the pandemic, we have noticed a lot of security breaches in the medical devices. So, what, according to you, are the vulnerabilities present in the medical devices? And what are your life experiences till now that have inspired you to work on the security of the medical devices?
Okay, so let's start with what's inspired me. What inspired me was at the age of 19, I got my first cardiac device implanted. Now, I have a complex set of problems, but it comes down to that my heart doesn't function properly. So I needed additional help. Now, obviously, at that point, you're not really considering the security, and I was newly just out of school, so I always love to tinker. I always like to hack things, and it's been something that I've done for my whole life. But that didn't weigh into my decision because at that point I knew that 100% I was not going to survive without the device. So that's just a patient perspective. For us, it doesn't really go about security. And about 2 years in with having the device, I heard a talk by Barnaby Jack. Now, Barnaby Jack is one of the inspirations for the work that I do and the work that I have taken up. And he first mentioned that these devices could be hackable. And I thought to myself, wow, I should maybe listen because I have one of these in my chest and it's beating my heart and I'm depending on it for life. And that's kind of how I started to explore the world of medical devices. Now, we need to understand that in a traditional United States-based hospitals, there's 3 to 6 devices next to a patient's bed that's actually connected. Now, if you start quantifying that out, we have quite a big, significant amount of devices. Now, these suffer from having exposed ports. They can have hard-coded passwords. Sometimes these passwords are hidden in base 64, which is fairly easy to decrypt. They might have passwords that are admin123. Um, they might have legacy protocols open, like port 23 is often one of those things that I find when I do an Nmap scan on a network connected device, and then it will have default credentials. And there are reasons for it. Unfortunately, one of the lessons that I learned was that medical devices, there isn't really a requirement for being secure, right? These things are designed to keep you alive. So we need to look at it from that perspective and also understand that a formal software requirement for these devices are to give clinical and health related support. But recently, as we've seen the vulnerabilities come out, we've had the induced pacemakers that have been there, we've had infusion pumps, we've had patient monitors, and all kinds of things, even insulin pumps being vulnerable. That means security has to come into the picture. But now we are 5 years behind. And sometimes the hardware doesn't support new and great softwares. So you will encounter Windows XP. You will encounter Windows CE from version 4 to 6, and you might encounter some other, variants of operating systems that are old. And that might just be because it's a legacy device.
Okay, that's true, actually. So, like, what, like, you think, like, what is the mistake in the manufacturing of the medical device? The basic steps start from there, where we are getting the medical devices, like from the vendors or the manufacturers.
So I think that is a very complex question because I can say to you in my experience in the last 5 years, there are some manufacturers that are actively taking steps by actually embedding security from the start of design, where design requirements are set throughout, and it's become a cultural shift. Then you have some organizations that security hasn't come really to feature in the forefront because their devices are medical devices. So it depends, is my answer to that question. Always, it depends on the variables. Now, we are trying to shift into the market where we see medical manufacturers build more secure devices. So you need to understand a device can be out there for 10 to 17 years. The one in my chest lasts for 17 years and it gets replaced. Now, in that 17 years, yes, there's software updates, yes, there's all these changes. Well, we need to know that software and firmware runs on hardware. Hardware is not something that's interchanged, and it can only support software and firmware as far as a certain point. So we have real hardware constraints. And this is also why lots of manufacturers still make use of the waterfall development process because of the fact that we're developing for hardware. So it's very hard for that shift to come in. I think we'll only really start seeing a huge difference in 5 years as these new devices start flooding the market and the legacy devices start going out.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So my next question is like about the medical device forensics. So many people are still unaware of this term and it's an open area of research. So what do we mean when we say that we are doing the forensics of the medical devices?
So I kind of developed my own process based upon the original digital forensic scientific process. But I changed it up a little bit because you need to understand medical devices, yeah, contain elements that we know and elements that we love in digital forensics, but they are different. They have complexities around them. Now, I basically look at it in a triangle, which is a very strong engineering shape, and it's one of my favorite shapes for this purpose. We have medical device engineering, which is currently a practice done by most medical manufacturers to determine whether a device is functioning properly, whether something's gone wrong. Now, this is kind of the same process I use for that acquisition phase. You know, that initial phase where we want to get hold of the data. Engineering practices help because inevitably you're going to have to open a device and you're going to have to find a diagnostic port. You're going to have to go old school and perhaps even do a USB that is a bootable floppy disk, because that's one of the things I had to do today. And you have to perhaps tinker and play with old school ways. And this is kind of what is so beautiful, is that we've done this before. It's perhaps before our time, but there are people that have done it before. So engineering is going to help you in the acquisition phase. Now, digital forensics is basically the reconstruction of a timeline or a sequence of events that have taken place. And this is what I kind of use to actually look at the file system, which always is something familiar. It might be exFAT, it might be FAT32, it might even be NTFS if we're looking at a Windows kiosk medical device. It might be iOS or Android. So there are different kinds of, it might be ext4. So if you look at the file system, which is the first layer that I like to investigate, that is how your data is stored, how it deals with data deletion and structuring. So we know that on a FAT32, we are able to go search for the value E5 across the disk and find files that have been deleted. Well, that is still very much relevant on medical devices. You don't think it is because you think it's a medical device, but it has to adhere to the file system's rules, right? You can't go change the way that the files are structured. So we know how to do that. So this is where our timeline comes in. We build a timeline of what's happened to the data, what's happened during the file system. But then the question comes, well, there's a clinical view, right? There's medical things that have happened. Now, medical forensics is traditionally used post-mortem, so when someone's passed away, to determine what's taken place. Now, if you take that, you can visualize the data, often by using open source solutions that medical staff use, so that you can do the same and create the timeline surrounding that. So the engineering helps us determine whether there's anything wrong with the device, has it been functioning properly, and digital forensics, we look at the file system, we look at the data structures, and we look at recovering data. Often these things don't have logs. Often they don't have the right kind of logs. And this is why lots of manufacturers are looking at building in forensic readiness or building in the Locard principle. Now, for those listeners that don't know, the Locard principle is the foundational thing that digital forensic functions on. That's where two things come into contact, trace evidence is left behind. That can be manufactured. That can be built in. And that's where some of the medical manufacturers I work with, they focus on, well, if we want to know something's happened, we need to do a sequence of events that lets us know it's happened.
Okay, like during the medical device forensics, so we basically deal with the data we are getting from the medical device. So the kind of data we are getting or the artifacts, so like how it's very helpful for getting or generating the truthful evidence. So can you share some real life incident that you may have came across?
So yes, I've done quite significant amounts of forensics on devices, and the one specific one that we looked at was a defibrillated device that someone used to shock someone, and the question was asked, well, whether or not that it shocking at the right frequency, was it was it working appropriately, was it calibrated. Now those kind of logs you can find, but then the question comes, can you say that the logs are authentic and not tampered with? And again, this is where I break it down to simplicities. It was an embedded Windows device, meaning it was running FAT32 as a file system. So I knew how to actually go about on imaging the device and know how to look at it, because it still adheres to computer science principles. Right? These are devices, but they contain operating systems and file systems we know. Right? It might not be in the traditional container. So in this instance, we went through it and firstly looked at whether the device was debugging properly. Could we run through the calibrations and the tests? Then we looked at what the forensic image told us. Were the logs intact? Were there any tampering around the date? What's the file system say? So looking specifically at the FAT tables to go get those, dates and times out, to look at them. And we determined that the device was calibrated and shocked at the appropriate level, as well as there was no tampering. But now I must say, if you go ask any doctor that works with cases where someone's passed away, and you say, well, how often do you look at the medical device, it will be far and few between, because as you said, this is a new line of thinking. It's very hard for medical personnel to conceptualize that I want to hack a device to kill someone, right? But if you think about it, people stab people every day, and this just extends the reach that you have to kill someone. So I think these devices should be looked at. Now, if you have connected Windows devices on your network in your hospital and those get breached through an attack that potentially could have ransomware on, it's most likely that that ransomware will spread to your Windows machines if you do not do segmentation appropriately.
Okay, like following to my previous question. So, like, how do we differentiate between the data, whether it was the actual physiological signals of the patient or whether it was a kind of cyber attack? Like, for example, like a person is having a very high blood glucose sugar level. So maybe the possibility is like he or she may have eaten something sugary, or it can also be possible that there was some kind of attack. So is it possible we can detect like whether the change or the modification in the data was with the actual physiological signals or whether it was a kind of attack?
So the way that you would look at it is by looking at the file system. Now, a lot of the insulin pumps have got embedded systems or bare metal. So that makes it a little bit complex, but they do have machine logs, and those machine logs do indicate when boluses have been changed, which is the value that a patient will receive. But it is still very much immature. And this is not to scare anyone. We need to understand that these attacks are A, sophisticated, B, proximity attacks. So meaning I have to be close by to do that. For example, that's most of the things with the pacemakers and ICDs or proximity attacks. So I kind of call them the stars have to align kind of attacks. But they don't at present have robust sims or solutions that, blinky lights go off and says it's happened. No, and the other thing with diabetics and diabetic monitors and glucose pumps is you have to calibrate those correctly. And if the patient doesn't calibrate them correctly, they might get the incorrect dose. So there's a lot of variables. It's not an easy answer to say, yes, there is logs. Will we be able to detect? Most likely reactively, we'll be able to go through the logs and look at the data artifacts. It depends on the manufacturer because there's various kinds. I've looked at a few, and these two are very different in terms of how they store their logs and what is contained in their logs. But the medical data on it can be extracted from the application on the phone. So it's not just the medical device itself. We need to understand the ecosystem. So there's normally a device inside someone's body or attached to someone's body. And this communicates sometimes to a monitor, um, or it connects to an application. That application sends the logs away, but there's no reactive monitoring on these devices. Not yet in any way, but it's something I'm working on as a medical sim solution that you can actually have these edge devices logs on to detect these things happening reactively.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So my next question is like presently, what are the medical devices you are working in your lab or with your students, and what are the tools and methodologies you are using for conducting the medical device forensics?
So I'm not going to name the manufacturers because A, they get super angry when you do that, but I have ICDs and pacemakers. I have 2 infusion pumps. I have 1 defibrillator currently, as well as patient monitors. I have 6 different ones. So it's quite a lot. So how this works is I am actually starting to teach a 3-week stint of medical device forensics at our university. We're one of the few that actually have a dedicated curriculum to it. Our tools are mostly hex editors, or things like X-Ways or Linux or the command prompt, or even just DOS. And I know it sounds super exciting using these old school things, but the forensic tools like the Axioms of the world, the autopsy, the FTK, all those blinky nice NKs, the things we love to make our jobs easier, they struggle because the data sets are not normal. If you look at the CPAP machines, they record in a .edf file. Now, luckily, .edf files are used in large big data science studies. So it's a very well-known, well-documented file structure. So you can write Python scripts to parse most files, file structures. So it's not so much about the tool as it is about the technique and about the methodology and the thinking process. There's not one tool to rule them all. If I had to choose one tool, it would be Python. That's what we quite significantly use during this time because it's the easiest way to look at the data.
This is like while you are conducting the medical device forensics, so there are different branches like the memory forensics, the network forensics, or the cloud forensics. So you are dealing with any particular branch, like or the device forensics just, or the network forensics also, like while we are transferring the medical data from one application to the mobile phone or either to the cloud. So are you covering all these forensics techniques also, or just you're working with the device?
So I specifically, being a patient myself, do the whole ecosystem. So we look at how data is transferred, we look at the communication protocols that are used, but it all does start at the device, right? It's one thing to have all these other nice things. If you don't understand the device that the data is coming from, you're not going to understand a lot. Now we look at the devices themselves to understand how the data is stored on the device, and we look at how the data is transferred out. I look at cloud forensics in terms of the cloud solutions, whether it's an AWS or Azure. I look at applications, so a bit of mobile forensics in terms of understanding what data the application records, because the data from the application is most likely either from the patient monitor or from the device itself. So we kind of look at the whole ecosystem. I maintain that actually looking at forensics from the beginning of the manufacturing process and building it in and having the whole ecosystem connected is better. When it comes to memory forensics, that's kind of where your embedded devices or your bare metal devices are, but they are not in the traditional sense as we would think about Windows memory forensics or Linux. These are kinds of just a lot of binary data that you have to kind of make sense of. It's very different, and there's not one device like another. And this is why I say to people, the FDA should really consider actually looking at how they classify medical devices, because I think there's not one solution for all, especially if you start breaking it down onto hardware, OS, file system, and those kind of things.
So are you facing any challenges like while you're conducting the medical device forensics? Because dealing with medical device, it's very challenging sometimes. So are you facing any challenges?
Well, yes, the manufacturers don't get overly enthusiastic to have me involved. Specifically if I have a talk and they see the talk, the conversation does get heated sometimes because this is not an incrimination or a finger pointing. I'm telling you what is wrong because it's what I found is wrong and I want us to fix it. This is not me telling you that you've done your job badly, and it's most likely something you didn't consider because you don't do digital forensics. One of these things is how people deal with data deletion. Now, specifically, if you have a medical device that runs a FAT file system, you might want to ensure that you're overriding each sector because FAT is notorious for keeping things and being easy to data recover on. So I think it's just that there needs to be the sense of comfortableness with the fact that medical devices are vulnerable. I know it's super scary, but it's something we have to be able to be comfortable to work on. These devices will at some point in their lifetime become vulnerable. There's no way getting around it. Hardware gets old, software gets outdated. It is inevitable. But the longer we fight against it and say we want to build the most secure, well, that's a pipe dream because there's no such thing as an overly secure device that cannot be broken into. What there is, though, is a device that has observability built in, that has forensics built in. Those are attainable things we can do. So instead of striving for the perfection of having an unhackable medical device that no one can use because no one remembers the username and password, have a device that we know something's gone wrong.
That's true. So, when you are conducting medical device forensics, so till now, what kind of attacks you've experienced? Like maybe it is the man in the middle attack or the denial of service attack.
So it's hard at this moment to say to you actively that this is being exploited or that's being exploited just because the devices aren't mature enough to give us that information, right? We're only going to see the change coming in. General vulnerabilities such as Telnet being open using default credentials is one that I often do. Buffer overflow is another one. Man in the middle is a big notorious one for RF devices. Um, but just bad unhygienic practices, for example, being able to introduce code into your device that runs and logs things that are happening on the EEPROM. Right, it's hygiene issues that come and bite you in the butt. Like having app keys and secrets in your logs or having mounting protocols for an encrypted drive, in your Linux logs. Those are kind of things that attackers will go for. I mean, I look at the logs as a way to understand how your workflow works. Now you need to understand if those kind of things, unhygienic practices are happening, they will be exploited. But hard-coded passwords in, medical manuals are a big thing. The device I looked at today runs Windows CE6. It is a patient monitor that monitors from other devices that connects to a central station. Now, the ports that were open were Telnet, 21 FTP, then you 443, as well as 6001. Now, Telnet, when you start doing your Nmap scans and you look at it, you understand, kind of what service of Telnet it was using. It was using Pocket Telnet, so I was able to download those drivers. I was able then to go find the Toradex manual and go find the usernames and passwords and log in via Telnet. So I had a command prompt. But they locked it pretty darn well until I plugged, these USBs in the back because it has to connect to other devices. I'm able to put a mouse and a keyboard in and then actually, crash the application to get into the embedded Windows on the back end. Now there I have physical access as well. So there's various ways you can get in, and that's not even to mention opening the device. This was just playing with it today and looking at what I can find low level. And I walked away with a full forensic image, and I walked away, with having full access on it, being able to remotely control it. Now, that unfortunately all could have been helped by, being more tidy and cleanly and locking things down a little bit more.
So, while you're conducting the medical device forensics, so are you creating the attacks also by yourself? Because creating sophisticated attacks is quite difficult. So, but then only we can proceed with the forensics when we are having a certain kind of attacks in the medical devices. So, presently, what are you doing to to create attacks and then proceed with the forensics part?
I'm doing a lot of OSINT, so going to read manuals and then basically using what the device does against it. And it's kind of like attacks don't have to be sophisticated. Attacks just have to be clean, right? Let's face it, getting into a medical device is not that sophisticated because a lot of these things are not that sophisticated. They're not these sophisticated large networks. If we're talking about medical devices in terms of electronic health records that is in a network of a hospital, well, that's different. Um, but those are often where the targets lie. Someone's not going to hack a hospital to try and pull my infusion pump up, right? This is why I say to people, this is not going to happen. More likely where you're going to use medical forensics is not because it's been hacked, but it's because it's failed and someone needs to determine why you potentially died. If we talk electronic healthcare records, well, now that's a juicy thing that an attacker would want because that's information they can sell. Information's king in the underworld. So that's different. But that is also not very well protected because, again, you're taking something that is designed by someone else, introducing it into your network. Now, if you don't do something like zero trust and you don't do sufficient segmentation, well, if they breach someone with a phishing attack and they can get into your network and they can access your electronic healthcare record, they can bring a hospital down. There's been two major cases, the one in Germany, and I'm going to probably say things that aren't going to be popular, but the two cases where there's been patients that have been hurt, it wasn't the ransom operator's fault. It was the hospital's fault because they had no backfill. They had no paper-based a way to deal with, patients because they were totally electronic. So it's, say ransomware's killed a person. Well, that's a bit of a stretch because no, it's the hospital's lack of having a risk management or disaster recovery plan that killed the patient. Now, that was a lady in Germany, and the other one was a dad that had a court case in the US with his baby that was premature and saying that if the hospital disclosed that they were attacked, he would have left with his baby and gone somewhere else. And he rightfully so is so. But again, it comes down to disaster recovery. Can you recover fast? That's the whole purpose of incident response. It's detect fast, recover fast. Hospitals, unfortunately, are notoriously very electronic based. Unless you're from a third world country like I'm from South Africa, and I'm pretty sure India as well is not totally electronic based and still do a paper based things. There was a hospital in there was a hospital in South Africa that got hit by ransomware. Oh, it's okay. We've done this before. Whipped out a pen and paper and they were fine. So yeah, it sucks sometimes coming from a third world country, but I can tell you sometimes it has its benefits because they can still do medicine without the use of technology.
Thank you. That was a really important information you shared. So my next question is quite important. It's like regarding how we can bring medical device forensics in real world. As we know, like presently the manufacturers who build the medical devices, they hardly look into the security aspects of the medical device. So the major goal is basically to build the innovative medical device we can so that the patient efficiently use it without any more workforce. So, is it possible to make a forensic ready medical device? Or is this be possible in the near future? We are having a forensic ready medical devices.
I'm hoping so because I've been quite pushing the last 5 years. And if you've ever seen me present, I normally get on a soapbox because I'm very short and I like getting on my boxes and having a discussion. But the FDA has brought out the new draft guidance, which does state that forensics needs to be built in at least some form of capabilities in logging. Now, I'm not saying the FDA guidance is good. I'm saying it's a step in the right direction. Now, I work with a few I work with one specific medical device company a lot, and they've made great strides from their implants throughout to their edge, the other devices that now have robust logging in place. And I'm pretty sure other, medical practitioners are going to get there as well because it's becoming a requirement. What do I think needs to happen to push this envelope more? Well, not being one of the only ones that is kicking and screaming against this, because I'm one person. I need a village. I need a team of people. So more people reaching out and saying, "Hey, I want to research it." I mean, I'm always looking for new people, whether it's a student, whether it's a a hacker off the streets. We are a great collective at the biohacking village. If you haven't Google them now. They do they do God's work. They really bring hackers to manufacturers. So if this is your passion, this is something where you can go. Um, all that I'm saying to my fellow forensicators, don't be too stringent when you do forensics on medical devices. You have to have a little bit of fluidity and give, because it's not the way you think it happens. It's not the traditional sense unless it's a Windows machine. But more people need to do it, and more people should not be scared to do it, because if you fail, for example, if you do something wrong with the device, well, guess you've learned one way not to do it. It's a valuable life lesson. And this is what my students do. They will work through tutorials on CPAP machines, on infusion pumps, and our patient monitors to actually learn how they function. And we show them from hacking to forensics, because we want to show them that sometimes the hacking techniques is how we get in to do our forensic acquisition. But the secret to that is documenting it. Contemporaneous notes is your friend.
Okay. So we are actually coming to the end of the interview. So my last question is like, what are your thoughts and opinions? Like how we can make either the vendors, the manufacturers, or the people aware of the medical device forensics, not just the medical devices, but all kind of IoT devices.
I think it is just more publications. I think that is my aim for the next 2 years, is to pump out the academic publications. And the reason being that the doctors don't really care about me, because A, I don't have a PhD yet. And I say yet because that's on my list. And B, it's not in a peer reviewed journal, because that's where they live and breathe. So for them to take note and force manufacturers to make things better, we need academic publications. Except for that, we need more hackers, more forensics people offering their services to manufacturers and trying to play and explore for it. Do I think that it's going to change with the guidance coming out? Yes, because the keywords are there: forensic readiness as well as logging capabilities, which means that every manufacturer is going to be in the market for a forensics person that can do medical device forensics. But IoT forensics is just so important, because IoT is taking over our world. Whether it is a smart speaker, whether it is a smart watch. I might add the Health Kit on Apple is quite amazing and integrates very beautifully with my medical device, which gives me a lot of information. But for those that have an Apple iWatch, go dump your health data out and just realize how much Apple is tracking you and how much you can actually pull from the forensics. It even tells you whether you're standing, you're sitting, lying down, whether you've moved or haven't moved. And we built these scenarios for our students around it. Say, someone was, found to be running away from the cops. Can you look at their health data to let us know whether or not they, were running or not? So it's looking at the steps and all those kinds of things. So take digital forensics, the box that you know it is, and break it open, apply it to any device. Because any device that has got computer components inside it and storage, you can do forensics on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Veronica, like for all the wonderful thoughts you have shared today. So like it's till now it was one of the best conversation I had with someone in the medical device forensics. And I would like to thank you for like taking your busy schedule and coming to my show. So like I hope like you have enjoyed all my questions.
I did, and I really thank you for having me on. And good luck with your work in medical device forensics. I look forward to seeing publications and hearing more. But if there's anyone that wants to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm always open to having a conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it was like great experience. I have learned a lot because presently, like what I was reading in the medical device forensics, it was not a very real conversation with someone who was actually sharing her experience, like what a person is doing actually in the medical device forensics. So it was really a very wonderful experience, like or the thoughts you shared with me. So I will definitely like continue whatever you said today, and I will definitely like remember all those things while applying in my research.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you.